We know that volume for fantasy points is definitely a good thing, but it's efficiency where we go from just being a good fantasy running back to seeing elite type of numbers. And I've spent the last 2 weeks breaking down volume versus efficiency, but now it's time to take a look at the running backs who gave us the most volume last season, but took the biggest fall when it came to being efficient. Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Let me take just a minute to explain what today's video is all about. Over the last couple of weeks, I've been doing a series of videos talking about volume and efficiency and how those two things affected each other when it came to the running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends that saw the most volume in 2023. And now we're wrapping it up, breaking down each position, taking a look at the players that saw the most volume and in this video saw the biggest drop in their efficiency. And then we need to try and determine if that drop in efficiency is something we need to be worried about or if we're still gonna be all in on them for 2024. Hopefully you feel like these videos are giving you a competitive edge as we head into draft season. But if you think you need a little bit more of an edge, I would definitely consider becoming a member of our channel today. And you can become a member for as little as $5 a month, which is gonna get you access to all of our exclusive members only content here on YouTube that the public doesn't get to see. It'll also get you access to our Discord with an awesome community full of knowledgeable fantasy football fans just like yourself. Whether you're looking for a new league, whether you want to bounce a trade idea off anybody, or find values in specific players, our Discord is exactly what you're looking for. And we have other tiers above that as well that can give you exclusive access to even more content like one-on-one sessions with Jake and myself. So you should really consider becoming a member today. But let's go ahead and jump right into the information. Today I've got my top 5 running back fallers that we need to keep an eye on because their efficiency last year was a huge downgrade from the volume that they received. All right, first up is going to be Tony Pollard, and it's really no secret that he did not live up to his draft position last season. And we know exactly why he underwhelmed last season. We've talked about it probably umpteen times last season and this offseason. It was his efficiency, and the numbers show it, because where he finished in terms of volume last season, he finished 17 spots lower for his efficiency. The first couple of years that Tony Pollard was in the league, he was used as a change of pace back by the Dallas Cowboys. Zeke was that guy that was running the ball up the middle, the bruiser that was doing the brunt of the work, and then Tony Pollard was getting the ball in open spaces. They were utilizing him as a weapon to try and wear down the defenses after Zeke was running straight at them. And that changed this year. When they let Zeke walk, they made Tony Pollard the bruiser, and that's just not what he is. When you hand the ball off to that guy and tell him to run up the middle 15 times a game, the numbers are not going to look great. So I really don't think a whole lot of the issues from last year are really Tony Pollard's fault. But then that begs the question heading into 2024. Is he going to be utilized differently? And that's why landing in Tennessee was such a weird scenario for him and not one that I saw coming. Him and Tajay Spears are pretty close to being similar backs. If Tony Pollard is going to be used the same way that he was in Dallas last season and the same way that Tennessee used to use Derrick Henry, he's not going to be any more efficient than what we've seen in years past. Now, his average draft position this year is going to be way less than it was last season, which means he could come at a discount, and maybe the volume is enough for where he's drafted. But if he doesn't have the efficiency, he's not going to have the upside. And when you take a look at the categories that he was best and worse in last season, it absolutely paints the picture that I just told you all about. This past season, he took a major drop in a lot of those efficiency categories. Yards after the catch per reception, points per snap, yards per target, areas that he has excelled in the past, he took a big downfall in. Whereas his best categories were those volume categories that he didn't excel in the years prior. Red zone carries and goal line carries. He was utilized all the time in the red zone. Targets, he still saw a really good amount of targets and work in the passing game last season, But once again, that efficiency just went downhill. And right now, over on Underdog, his ADP sits at 99.6, and he's the 29th running back off the board in drafts. And maybe that changes a little bit from best ball leagues to redraft season when those drafts end up picking up. But that's a far cry from the late first round pick, early second round pick that you had to use to draft him last season. And also, depending on how heavy you go with running backs in your drafts, if you draft him as your RB3, you're not missing out on a whole lot. You're getting a guy that you can put in your flex every single week that, as the starter in Tennessee, an offense that will probably be throwing it deep quite a bit, could still pick up enough volume to return that type of value. So for this year, yeah, I don't know if I love Tony Pollard. I don't know if he's going to go much higher in terms of scoring than what his ADP currently is. But if his ADP can stay where it is and he can return that type of value, then he wouldn't end up being a bad choice on draft day. But if you're expecting anything more than that, that's where you would get yourself in trouble. All right, our next biggest faller was Joe Mixon, who fell 13 spots from where he finished in volume to where he finished in efficiency. And if I'm guessing, no one is really shocked by that. Early in his career, Joe Mixon did really well in several key efficiency categories. And it was something that we felt would continue to build up the more that he got work and the better that he became. And unfortunately, it's been the other way around. Over the last couple of years, the volume's been great, but his efficiency has just absolutely plummeted. And while some of the efficiency could absolutely end up getting better, and some of it is maybe Joe Mixon's fault, some of it also needs to be attributed to the fact that that's just the way Cincinnati built their offense. Over the last couple of years, they really have overlooked the offensive line and have looked at other pieces of the offense instead. And it got him to a Super Bowl, so I can't really complain all that much. But it also has made Joe Mixon way less valuable than we would have liked, and it also got Joe Burrow hurt. And we see another situation where his worst categories were the efficiency categories. And it was really those categories that help a running back start to pick up those extra yards and really become more efficient. The avoided tackles per attempt, the yards after contact per attempt. You know I love those statistics. So when I see Joe Mixon do very poorly in it, it really looks to me like, hey, this is a guy that just is not getting the ceiling that we really would like him to have. And then, of course, his volume, not only in the red zone, but just overall in terms of how many touches he got last season. And maybe some of that has to do with Joe Burrow being hurt, and they just had to lean on Mixon a little bit more. And during the year last year, when we talked about Joe Mixon, this was a guy that was giving you a lot of consistent RB2 weeks. The ceiling was non-existent for him, all right? You were not winning any weeks because of Joe Mixon. Maybe there was a couple of times later in the season, but Joe Mixon was just the guy that you were putting in as your RB2, and he was giving you RB2 numbers, literally. Every single week, it seemed like the dude finished as an RB2. But now, in my opinion, he's in a better situation than what he was the last couple of years. The offenses, in terms of offensive firepower, are really the same. Joe Burrow and CJ Stroud are on the same plane right now to me, and you might disagree with that, and maybe CJ Stroud does see a sophomore slump, but I'm willing to bet on him given what I saw last year. And he's surrounded with terrific weapons. Nico Collins, Tank Dell, they added Stephon Diggs, Dalton Schultz. And I would be willing to argue the weapons that they have in Houston give them a better all-around offense than what he's been with in Cincinnati. Jamar Chase, yeah, great. T. Higgins, very good. And Jamar Chase might be the best weapon out of everybody listed on both rosters, but when you spread everything out, the talent as a whole, including the offensive line, is better as a whole than what he had in Cincinnati. And not only that, but Houston has committed to Joe Mixon. Because if you remember this offseason, the plan was that the Cincinnati Bengals were going to release Joe Mixon. And this was after all of the top running backs had signed. Houston stepped in at the last minute and said, nope, we'll give you a draft pick for him, make the trade for Joe Mixon, and then give him a brand new 3-year contract. Houston wanted Joe Mixon, and they invested in Joe Mixon, and he is going to be a big part of this offense. And right now, his ADP over on Underdog puts him at 61st overall and the 15th running back off the board. And actually, I love that draft position for him because he's a guy that you could take as potentially your RB2, and at worst, you're probably going to get RB2 numbers comparable to what we saw last year. But it also is low enough ADP that it gives you a little bit of return on value, because I do think Joe Mixon is a guy that could work his way into the RB12, 11, even 10 area, and again, give you a better return on that ADP right there. Now, come redraft season, I could see his ADP going a little bit higher. I think best ball players right now are probably passing on him in favor of a couple of other guys that might have a little bit more potential upside. But I'm willing to bank on Joe Mixon not only seeing a good amount of volume comparable to what he saw last year while in Houston this season, but those efficiency numbers finally seeing a pretty decent climb. All right, this one may be difficult to talk about for a lot of you, and it is the highest drafted player out of any of the 5 that we're going to talk about today. Saquon Barkley may be in a new and better spot, but I think we really need to be asking the question, how high is his upside? Barkley saw a 12-spot drop from his volume finishing spot to his efficiency finishing spot last season. And of course, the New York Giants offense last year was an absolute disaster. So it's not surprising to see that type of a drop for Saquon Barkley. He got a decent amount of volume, but the efficiency was really poor all season long. And I'm not here to tell you to not draft Saquon Barkley, because I do believe he is going to be a good fantasy asset this season. But I'm going to say the same thing that I've been saying all offseason long. The days of thinking that Saquon Barkley are going to finish as the RB1, 2, or maybe even 3 may be out the door. There's a lot of guys that I would be willing to take over Saquon Barkley that I feel like could finish much higher than him. Barkley's going to be safe this year. He's in a good offense, and he's definitely going to get a decent amount of volume. But maybe all the injuries that he has sustained since he entered the NFL are starting to catch up with him. Maybe he has slowed a little bit. This is a guy that has not played a full season since his rookie year. Over the last 3 seasons, he has missed 9 total games. And obviously back in 2020, when he suffered his ACL injury, he missed basically the entire season. Every running back gets banged up. And yeah, a lot of running backs these days are going to miss time. But with Saquon Barkley, it does feel like every single season he's dealing with some type of an injury that can cause him to miss some time. And maybe they're just building up at this point. And maybe that does affect his efficiency. And maybe his efficiency, we don't need what we used to see back when he was a rookie. Maybe we just need the volume for him to be safe. In terms of efficiency, last season was definitely his worst year for efficiency. He just wasn't as explosive, and you can see that by finishing 21st and avoided tackles per attempt. His explosiveness with yards after the catch per reception, that took a little bit of a hit as well, and his points per snap were down too. Volume-wise, he was still pretty good last season, 3rd in receiving touchdowns, and then he finished 8th in red zone carries and rushing attempts overall. But like I said, he is going to be the most expensive player that you would invest in on this list in 2024. Right now, he is a 2nd-round pick and the 6th running back drafted. And there are some guys going after him, like Kyren Williams and Derrick Henry, who from an efficiency standpoint could potentially be better than Saquon Barkley, and from a volume standpoint could still be in the same area as well. And with Saquon Barkley, my main concern for his upside is the work in the passing game. We know in the past his work in the passing game is what pushed him up the final boards at the end of the season for overall score. Now, if he's just getting a lot of work on the ground, that's fine. That makes him a safe running back. That makes him a guy that, even in the 2nd round, that's fine with me, not that big of a deal. But if you're drafting him to be like the RB1, 2, or 3 on the season, on a team that's got A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert taking a lot of those touches and a lot of those targets throughout the season in the passing game. That's where we get into trouble and potentially expecting way too much from Barkley. But once again, I'm not off Saquon Barkley. I like him. Even if he is just a safe running back this season, he could still end up being a good investment in the second round. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Give me your defense of either drafting Saquon Barkley early or skipping on Saquon Barkley altogether. And if this video gets 600 likes, then I'll pick someone from the comment section that gives me their defense of Saquon Barkley to win a free draft guide. All right, next player up is going to be Rashad White. And I would be willing to bet my next paycheck that as soon as I mentioned that name, somebody out there was getting ready to type in the comments calling me a hater. And I'm not a Rashad White hater. The only thing I've done the entire time is just giving you the numbers, the cold hard facts, and what they mean. But it didn't shock me at all to see Rashad White take a 9-spot dive from volume to efficiency. Because from an efficiency standpoint, White wasn't all that good last season. Yards per attempt, yards after contact per attempt, avoided tackles per attempt. The dude was 19th or lower in several of those main efficiency categories, which is kind of tough to look at because when you take a look at a guy like Saquon Barkley and you say, hey, his efficiency wasn't great last season because he played in a really poor offense, passing game was inconsistent, not that great. It's not the same thing when you talk about Rashad White. Rashad White had Baker Mayfield, who was really, really good last year. Mike Evans had a great season. Chris Godwin was still there as well. They have weapons in Tampa Bay. And even with those weapons, and as good as that offense was at times, Rashad White was relying solely on volume and touchdowns to propel his fantasy points. And a lot of that came in the passing game. You can see his rushing attempts on the ground, his receptions, and his receiving yards. Top 3 in all of those areas. But now we've got a little bit of a different dynamic in Tampa Bay. They've brought in Bucky Irving out of Oregon. And I don't think Bucky Irving is a great running back by any means. I don't think he's going to be a guy that makes a consistent contribution to any offense. But I know he can catch passes out of the backfield. And I know that that is an area where Tampa Bay could look to spell Rashad White a little bit more often going into this season. So if he loses the volume in the passing game, not all of it, but some of it, if the touchdowns maybe don't replicate themselves this year, and if his efficiency doesn't get any better, now you're taking away the ceiling that we saw last year from his work in the passing game, and you're also looking at a floor that isn't necessarily as good as it was at times last year because he's not going to be getting as much volume as we would like. This right now is a recipe for disaster with Rashad White. And it's a recipe for disaster for anybody out there that may overdraft him. And I gotta say, right now, his ADP over on Underdog isn't awful. It's actually pretty close to where I would expect it to be. Right now, he's going 60th overall as the RB14 off the board. But I guarantee you, when we get to redraft season, that best ball ADP is going to go out the window. He's going to end up being drafted a lot higher. In fact, I wouldn't be shocked if when redraft season kicks off, if we don't see Rashad White drafted as a top 12 running back. And I gotta be honest, I don't know if I'm drafting him in that area. Take this information and do with it what you would like. Right now at his current ADP, I'm not going to tell you to skip on Rashad White. Heck, James Cook is being drafted over Rashad White right now, and I would still probably take White over Cook. So I'm not hating on Rashad White because we don't hate players, we hate ADPs, and we hate expectations that are inflated when people just don't look at the numbers and understand what they mean. And that's what is going to potentially happen with Rashad White. If things get a little bit too crazy with his ADP and it ends up going higher and higher and higher, and now you have to spend a pick on him that potentially goes into the second round, early third, that's where I'll start hating a little bit more. All right, final player that we're going to talk about in this video was one of my must-haves for last season. And when you look at the overall production, Travis Etienne exceeded expectations and his draft spot. But he did not exceed expectations when it came to his efficiency, because he saw a 7-spot drop to where he finished for volume to where he finished for efficiency. Now, his finishing area and some of those efficiency categories were not nearly as bad as some of the other running backs that we've talked about in this show. Yards per attempt was one of his lowest categories. He finished 20th in that area. But then when you take a look at yards after contact per attempt and his points per snap, he was 15th in that area. So he was like right in the middle point of a lot of the running backs that we've talked about so far. And even one of his best finishing categories, avoided tackles per attempt, is an efficiency category, and he finished 4th in that area. And he also saw some pretty high finishes in the receiving areas as well. His receptions and his targets finished top 5 in both of those areas. So when I take a look at the numbers for Travis Etienne, I'm not as worried about him as I am some of the other guys, because once again, one of his best finishing spots, avoided tackles per attempt, is an efficiency category. And he didn't score as low as some of the other running backs that we've talked about in his efficiency stats. He just received so much volume last season that he finished a lot higher in that area. Now the question becomes in 2024, what do we get from Travis Etienne? The Jags offense last season definitely was a roller coaster. There was some times where it looked like it was one of the better offenses in football, and then all of a sudden Trevor Lawrence would throw 4 or 5 interceptions and it would look awful. And that negatively affects what Travis Etienne does in the run game. And we'll add some injuries in there as well. But we know Doug Peterson has said many times this offseason that he wants to lighten the workload for Travis Etienne, which in my opinion isn't a horrible thing as long as his ADP doesn't get out of control. And right now over on Underdog, he's drafted 42nd overall as the running back 10 off the board. He could do with maybe falling a couple of more spots to make sure that we get some more value. But I definitely think that he is going to see more consistent production in 2024 than what he did in 2023. So do I think he's going to outdo the numbers that he did last year? No, but I think we're going to see those numbers spread out a little bit better. Where on a weekly basis, you're not nearly as sick when you see such a low score come in for him. And I also don't think he'll be touchdown dependent like he was last season at times. But this offense has added weapons all over the field at the wide receiver position. They still have Christian Kirk. They still have Evan Ingram. And they just paid Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence is expected to have a bounce back this year. Now, maybe Trevor Lawrence isn't a top 5 quarterback like he was drafted to be as the first overall pick, but hey, just give me good fantasy numbers and just take better care of the football. If you do those things, Travis Etienne, efficiency goes up, and even if we lose a little bit of that volume, the efficiency will help take care of that, and he ends up being a guy that finishes in the top 10 once again. Headliner Nation, I appreciate you all tuning in to another video, and hopefully you're not getting bored with this series that I'm doing. I know it is a lot of videos, but last year I took a lot of information and kind of packed it into less videos, and sometimes I would get comments from people saying, hey, it's a little hard to follow. So this year I decided to spread it out over multiple videos to hopefully give you a better idea of what I'm talking about and give you some better knowledge as well, and all while making it more digestible and giving you an opportunity to soak it in a little bit more. Headliner Nation, that's going to end up doing it for me. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel, think about becoming a member like we already talked about, and make sure that you turn on those bell notifications so anytime we drop new content, you will know about it right away. And of course, leave some comments down below, hit that like button, and YouTube is going to recommend one of our last videos to you. Make sure if you never got it, that you check it out right now. Peace out, Headliner Nation. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.